Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbyville. It's no secret that Texas A&M's contribution to our country's war efforts have gone above and beyond those of most other universities. We have had the honor of featuring many former students right here on Veterans of the Valley. Well, now they have a book dedicated to their service, Texas Aggies Go To War, authored by one of the foremost historians of Texas A&M, Henry C. Dethloff, Professor Emeritus of History at Texas A&M, along with former student John A. Adams. Texas A&M sent more than 20,000 to serve in World War II alone, more than 14,000 of those as commissioned officers. It's an extraordinary account of service, and it's an honor to have Henry Dethloff on Veterans of the Valley. Henry, it is an honor to have you here. Let's talk about the book and the project. I know this is a project that was some 3.5 years in the making. Talk about the project that became Texas Aggies Go To War.
All right. It started back when, I guess in 2002, and a group of former students decided that they needed to help encourage the Corps of Cadets and help commemorate and illustrate the history of A&M's tradition of service, and it's been a remarkable tradition. But in any event, they somehow or other they got to me and asked me if I would be interested in doing that, and indeed I was very interested. And so these are my sponsors basically for the project, and they put it together. They have basically put themselves in the position of readers, consultants, advisors, and critics on occasion, and I think it's worked very nicely. Primarily the individuals involved in that were C.C. Taylor, Bill Lonnquist, Jim Nelson, and Major General William A. Becker, and I think they earn a lot of credit for the product that finally came out. The story is an incredible story. I've been at Texas A&M since 1969, and I guess I've become immersed pretty much in A&M history and lore, and it's fascinating, and this war experience is indeed an incredible experience, especially when you put it together. And it started long ago. And incidentally, one of the themes that kind of ran through my mind as we worked on the book is this concept of service. And I think Aggies have portrayed and exemplified service to their country in ways that are just outstanding. President Bush, former President Bush, I think has put a sort of a stamp on that concept of service when he said a successful life by definition includes service to others. And a former president of the former students, Bill Yonkin, for example, put it this way, and I think that helps encapsulate the whole concept of this history of service, that Aggies have been marching off to war, offering up their service and their lives to carry out the country's colors since our inception, and so it continues today. And indeed, it has continued. It started back in the Spanish-American War.
Indeed, and I want to start there because a lot of people don't realize that Aggies have been in just about every war fought since 1898, and you can go back to the Spanish-American War.
I would guess there are very few wars and very few battles in any war that Aggies have not been participants in.
Indeed.
And that's just remarkable. The trick with this book, indeed, was to compile the history of war and the individual Aggies and put them in their spot in that war, and then sort of the history of A&M and so forth, and envelop it all in one big story. And I hope we did that to some degree of satisfaction.
Matter of fact, you talk about the Spanish-American War, and in your book, you're able to list some 36 Aggies who fought in the Spanish-American War.
I was amazed to find when we went to, in fact, let me mention that the Texas A&M University archives, Dr. Chapman and the library and so forth, have been tremendously supportive in this program, in this effort of research. The materials there are unbelievable. I found a scrapbook, for example, with all the pictures from Spanish-American War in it, photographs. Milby Porter, I think, was one of the guys who was in the photographs. George McCormick, they were there. You could see these people, you know, they were from the local community, they were students, and they went off to war in 1898. A lot of them ended up in Camp Cuba Libre near
Florida.
Jacksonville, Florida.
Right.
And most of those later will go into Cuba in the Army of Occupation. Others participated in the battles. We had one, unfortunately, I've never been able to find it, Rough Rider from the Aggies. This is mentioned in the minutes of the Board of Directors. Never gave me a name. I've read Theodore Roosevelt's books, checked his list. Can't find them. Maybe someone out there can find out who our Rough Rider was. We had a Rough Rider for sure.
Obviously, there's a lot of research to be done. Then you move on, World War I. You have a list of Aggies that served in World War I. One name that sort of popped out of me, class of '09, Jesse Easterwood, of whom
Sure.
our airport field is named after. He was a World War I veteran.
Right. Easterwood was a pilot, and there's another story that sort of astounded me and I had not been aware of. The Aggies were, I won't say obsessed, but they were excited by aviation. And I think what happened, as well as I can tell, in 1911, somebody flew into the campus in a Wright Flyer, and it just amazed everyone.
I bet
And
it
all
did.
of the Aggies wanted to be pilots from then on. Then during the war, we had sort of a pilot, this is World War I, we had a pilot training program here. We had an aviation mechanics program here, auto mechanics, meteorology, all kinds of war training programs. Incidentally, the campus became a war training camp as well, of course, as those cadets from the campus going off to war in their own right. We had, I believe, about 2,200 Aggies in war in World War I. I forget the exact, about 1,200 officers probably. Some of them, I think, and indeed this is another part of the A&M story, and that is people like Edward B. Cushing, Cushing Library
Right.
fame and so forth, and many others, I think were particularly expert in their military efforts because they were also trained engineers, sometimes people too trained in food services, trained in agriculture. Agriculture and engineering were very important skills, academic disciplines that help create a better officer in the modern military.
I want you to expand on that, because that's one thing that I found fascinating, that you say that Texas A&M generally made better officers to some extent than those from the military academy because of their life skills, let's say, in engineering and agriculture, whereas the folks that came out of the military schools, West Point, were more tactical type.
They're focused tended to be more military. We had a strong military, of course, obviously, focus and training and program, but the greater content in the Aggie officer basically was that they were out of programs in engineering, in agriculture, science, and of course in all sorts of things now, computer technologies and what have you. And if you think about it, modern warfare, I suppose, draws heavily on chemical engineering, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering.
Right.
In fact, we had some folks go off to war in France in World War I who became experts in their tank warfare because they understood mechanical vehicles. And most people, face it, in 1914, 1918, really had very little experience in mechanical engineering. Civil engineering, you built ports and docks and airfields and roads and things that are very critical in warfare. Right. So these people knew what they were doing. They were very able officers.
One pretty well-known fellow from World War II, a fellow named General George Patton. Matter of fact, he would tend to agree with you. His quote, "Give me an army of West Point graduates and I'll win a battle. Give me a handful of Texas Aggies and I'll win a war." He said that.
And Aggies love that, and I do too, of course. That's
You'll see that printed a lot.
Quite a statement. That's right. And I think that's the background for that kind of a statement, that war involves a very broad context, a very broad construction, and Aggies had that breadth and that kind of technical experience that was very important in modern war.
We focus a lot on World War II, what we call the greatest generation now. It's obviously a big focus that this generation has, and very, very rightly so. And you look back at World War II and the Aggies and how they were involved in it. From your book, I see that there was a Lieutenant Roy Gillette, class of 1940, who was actually one of the few anti-aircraft resistance people at Pearl Harbor
Pearl
on
Harbor,
December
yeah.
7th.
I think Aggies probably were at every single battle of World War II, from Pearl Harbor, Kregerdoor, obviously, all the way through. Gillette, as I recall, when we were attacked, we weren't ready, obviously, at all. This was a total surprise. In fact, the ammunition was locked in a locked storage house, and Gillette had to go break into the storage house, get the ammunition out, and load it into his guns and so forth. He was one of the few anti-aircraft emplacements that was able to fire against the Japanese. I want to say they knocked down 5 Japanese planes. Right. Don't quote me, but
you mentioned Kregerdoor, and in your book you also tie that in with Patton, and you list some 88 Aggies, most of them in classes between 1930 and 1940, who actually fought. Many of those died in those two arenas of Kregerdoor and Patton. Talk about that.
Well, that was a rough start, obviously, for the United States and for Texas A&M in particular. General George F. Moore, Colonel Moore then, had been ordered to Kregerdoor in 1940 in preparation, if you will, for the impending dangers that seemed to be developing around the world. And Moore had been Commandant of Cadets at Texas A&M and decided it would be good to issue orders to his new graduating officers to come to Kregerdoor with him. And so I think 25 from the class of 40, I believe it was, don't quote me on that either, came with Moore to Kregerdoor. They were all there when Kregerdoor was attacked by the Japanese in 1941. So it was no coincidence that they happened to be at Kregerdoor. When MacArthur left, when the attack came and MacArthur got out to do greater, grander things on another day, his word was to Moore was to hold Kregerdoor till I return. They held it as long as they possibly could. They held it to the very last man, of course, and eventually were forced to surrender. And many of those, and also folks on Patton Peninsula, including a lot of Aggies, were captured, and many were in that death march, that took them to the Cabana Tower prison camp and so forth. Many died. It was a horrendous experience to start the war, but
I want to get
Aggies were there.
I want to get to some photographs because I don't want to miss them, because there's some photographs from the book. As a matter of fact, that we do have for you. The book, of course, Texas Aggies Go To War. So we're going to put those up on the screen here one at a time and get you to talk about them. First picture is actually, there's the cover of the book, Texas Aggies Go To War. Talk a little bit about the cover.
Well, the cover shows General Rudder and his folks at the Rangers, Rudder's Rangers at Pointe du Hoc in France, and below that is the photograph from the group who went to Camp Cuba Libre and Milby Porter. I think it comes from Milby Porter.
It's in the top right. If you get a bigger look at that book, you'll see, that's
a magnifying glass. You can find him there. But that sort of encapsulates, the beginning and then the heart of the A&M military experience.
Henry Dethloff has written over 30 books, and at least 4 of those have been about Texas A&M. Let's move on just quickly. There's the cover of the pictorial history, the first pictorial history that you wrote from 1876 to 1976, and then move on to the follow-up of that one, Texas A&M University. This is the one you edited, second edition. That's a very familiar book that's on a lot of coffee tables of many Aggies out
Still
there. I'm sure it is. Let's move on to some of the photographs actually from the book, Texas Aggies Go To War. What are we looking at there? That's a biplane.
That's that's a biplane. It's a Curtiss JN4. I had to jot that down. That's probably in about 1917, 1918, and that was the standard training aircraft for the Army Air Corps, of course, during World War I. And most Aggies will have learned to fly in that.
They nicknamed that Jenny, as a matter of fact. And that's some kind of picture, because everybody's very familiar with the academic building in the background, and there's a biplane right there in the front yard. Probably don't see much of that these days.
No, you don't. Right.
No. Let's move on. Interesting picture here.
All right, this is an auto assembly repair plant on campus during World War I. We had all sorts of training programs. This was part of the training programs to provide training for mechanics, for aircraft mechanics, incidentally, meteorologists were trained here. And to give you a sense that of the modern era dawning, we also had people trained in horseshoeing and feeding livestock and that kind of thing. So we were going from the age of mechanics and automobiles from the age of the horse. And in fact, most of the soldiers who were trained in World War I were horse soldiers.
We're going to move on to something we're going to talk about in a minute. This is actual scene from the movie We've Never Been Licked, which was filmed on the Texas A&M campus, I believe, in 1942.
Right. And that movie incident, if you haven't seen it, folks need to go see We've Never Been Licked with Robert Mitchum and
Noah Berry Jr.
Noah Berry, Quinn, what was his name?
Richard Quine, I believe.
Richard Quine, yes,
Right.
Richard Quine.
Right.
That's an incredible story, and it's important not because it's Texas A&M, really, but because it's the United States of America, and it struck a very strong chord that we shall overcome, if you will. We will resist. These were very dark days in 1942. We had done nothing but go down, and the world was not looking good at all. This gave Americans a great deal of encouragement and support and enthusiasm they really needed at a critical time.
This photograph, a fascinating photograph. The person second from the right is Major John A. Hilger, A&M class of 32. He was really first in command, or second in command to Jimmy Doolittle, who is the gentleman to his right, second from the left. And they are there with Madam Chiang Kai-shek as they are being given an award.
Yes.
Fascinating picture there.
Yeah, there were 4 or 5 Aggies, again, don't quote me, on the Doolittle
raid.
raid.
There were 6 in all.
Oh, 6 in all, good.
Half a dozen
Thank
in
you.
all, including John Hilger, who was on the Doolittle raid.
Right, yes, they're on the Doolittle raid, and this, of course, was an important, again, largely psychological boost to the United States war effort. We were desperate, and this struck a chord of that we can do something. We are going to effectively resist this aggression.
Right. And there we go. Now, let's look at this picture. This is a group photograph. This was a muster of sorts, was it not?
Right. This is during the height of the Pacific Campaign. I would guess that probably Aggies, again, participated in every major Pacific campaign, and again, from Pearl Harbor on, Tarawa and Iwo Jima and what have you. This is Bougainville, and it's right after the close of the major Battle of Bougainville, and this is muster, the Bougainville muster, in April 21st, 1944, and these are soldiers who are there and have just been fighting.
Pretty amazing, a muster in Bougainville. Okay, let's move on. I think we've got some other pictures. This is on campus, of course, very familiar figure of the war, General and future president at that time,
Dwight D.
Eisenhower.
Right. These are happier times now. This is the end of the war, the victory muster, if you will, 1946, and Eisenhower is on campus. At the moment, I won't try to name all the other folks, except that just this side of Eisenhower is Olin E. Teague, Congressman Teague. And these were exciting times. Finally, Aggies are coming home. We're getting started again, and the world is beginning to come back to a sense of normalcy, I suppose.
Looking at the background, looks like that picture was taken at Kyle Field.
Yeah, it was, right.
Indeed. Let's move on to the next photograph.
That's Kregerdoor.
Right. That's at Kregerdoor. That's a muster.
This is the 45 Kregerdoor Muster. The war is over. 46, I'm sorry. The war is over, and these are folks still on Kregerdoor and accessible to the muster. Musters were held all over the world at the close of the war, and I think that's an attribute and distinction of Texas Aggies everywhere.
What do we have here?
This, I think, is the Berlin muster.
Right.
And they were in Berlin. Incidentally, there's a story that excited me when I found out that Texas Aggie, Mr. Kotzebue, was one of the first Aggies to make contact with the Russian armies on the Elbe River at the close of the war, when the Russians and the American armies were closing together. And there was tremendous friendship and cordiality and excitement and celebration, of course. That, I'm afraid, disappeared shortly after that. But that was a happy moment.
Indeed it was.
In world history, in our history.
Let's move on. I believe we've got, this is an interesting picture here. I don't think we know the fellow to the right, but the fellow on the left is a
Herbert
former Aggie
Mills,
student.
right? He's an Aggie in class, and I better not try to call his class, but he's a pilot. Aggies were very prominent in the Air Corps in World War I, very prominent, of course, in World War II. You quoted General Patton a while ago. I think he called General Whalen, O.P. Whalen, the best damn general in the Air Force, an Aggie general.
That's
who
right.
did a
That
tremendous
photograph
amount.
we just saw.
Yeah, General Shriver, of course, is Air Force general who helped us get it started in our space program.
Right.
There was an awful lot going on.
That picture of Mills was a class of 13. That was a World War I picture, as a matter of fact, that was
Yes,
taken
yeah.
in
We were kind of
October of
flipping back there,
1918,
right.
flipping back and forth.
Right.
Keep going. I think we've got another picture. This is Charles de Gaulle, French President Charles de Gaulle, awarding to James Earl Rudder.
Right. This is Rudder, of course, was a hero of the French and a hero of the Americans. One of the first men ashore at Point de Houx, the Allied invasion, and this was the beginning of the American push against the Germans, of course, back into Germany, and marked the beginning of the end of the war. I think it was a significant moment, and this is a classic photograph. Mr. Rudder, of course, after the war becomes president at Texas A&M.
This photograph probably fascinates me more than any. It looks like just a group of men, but this is the class of 1941 who all went off to war as a group.
Right. The class of 41 entered the military service together, were sworn into service. One of my sponsors, incidentally, and I'd have to get up and try to find him, but is in probably the third rank there, and that's General William A. Becker, who was prominently involved in Korea, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and so forth, and has been a very helpful member of the review and writing team, I would say.
A lot of those Aggies that you see in that picture, 1941, were lost in that war.
Right.
I love this picture. This is back here at home at Texas A&M. This was a march to Bryan as a celebration, right?
You bet. We're going back another war now. We're
going
flipping
back
back.
Another war, because this is after World War I.
This is
the
World War I.
Celebration of Armistice Day.
Armistice Day, November the 11th, 1918. And we're marching to Bryan. I want folks to look at that picture. You know, where are the homes? Where are the subdivisions? Where are the trees? That was a long march to Bryan.
I wonder if
College
that's
Station was.
wonder if that's what's Welborn Avenue right now.
Well, probably would be.
It probably would be.
Probably would have been
the
Welborn.
most direct route to
bet.
Bryan. And I believe that they just sort of struck classes that day. They decided that they weren't going to go to class that day.
This was a revolt.
This was a revolt. They were going to march to Bryan in celebration.
Right.
In celebration. I'm not. I've lost count. I'm not sure if we have any more photographs or not. And I guess we don't. That's it. But what a fascinating book. This book, this project, though, is actually just the beginning. It's just one element of what's really a larger project. I want you to talk about that because we're going to talk about a documentary, also things on databases, on the internet. There's a lot involved with what this book represents.
When we started putting this together, one of the big problems, of course, is getting all the resources, doing the research. And so the Association of Former Students have tremendous files. Most of those now we have transferred over to the archives for safekeeping and for future research. Jerry Cooper, incidentally, who was the former Texas Aggie editor, was very helpful in this effort. Joan Tatchie has been, particularly the former students, everybody has been very, very supportive. But getting the resources has been an important part of the work. And so in that effort, one thing we've done is try to promote the archival program and encourage people, incidentally, to send their war memoirs and materials to the Texas A&M University Archives. Dr. David Chapman, who also has been a big supporter and collaborator, let's say, in this project.
Matter of fact, there's a website, as a matter of fact,
we have
that
the
I
library,
believe that we can put up on the screen here in a moment. I believe.
Yeah,
we
I
have
would
that
encourage
ready, and
people,
we'll put
if they are interested in this, to go to the
there it is, right there.
Aggies in War website. We developed this in conjunction with the research because the idea is to encourage people to send in their information. Then I could go to that, or we could go. John and I could go to that and find information that may have been overlooked in files. And there's a lot overlooked, of course. That's, I don't know how many eras in the book, but the biggest era is, of course, the era of omission. My guess is that probably some 50,000 former students have served in military, and we have a precious few of those represented in this book. But the record needs to be kept. One thing we're doing now as a sequel and as part of this effort is to take these names, this directory, this Aggies in War electronic directory, and hopefully do a published version of those who served, history of the listings basically of former students who have been in military service and served prominently in combat. There's an opportunity for people to tell their stories, to give their names, and if not the individual, to do it for your parents and grandparents and so forth.
It's certainly a part of history that needs to be revived and kept forever.
Another component that we're working on now too is to do a film documentary.
Right.
That'll be an incredible story. The problem of putting that together is awesome, but I think it can be done. And in fact, some folks I've talked to have said, well, you need 8 or 10 hours of documentary on this kind of thing. Hopefully we can start it off with a 30 or 45 minute or several hour kind of presentation. The story is going to be an incredible story. So there's been a lot. We've done some journal articles. John and I did some journal articles for the Texas Aggie to help hopefully encourage people to become interested and to participate in producing information about the military service of former students at Texas A&M.
I want to mention John Adams again. He helped you in this book. He's done a couple of books himself on the Corps of Cadets.
Right.
And, but he just recently left us and moved to Florida, where he's a development director for sort of the statewide chamber down there.
Yes, Enterprise, Florida. John had been in Laredo with the Laredo Development Foundation now, and I think Governor Bush in Florida hired him to take on this job, and it's, I think, a great job, and John's going to do a great job of that work too.
Indeed, indeed. I also want to mention that former President Bush wrote the foreword for your book also.
Listen,
something you're very proud of.
You bet. That has been a tremendous thing. And Mr. Bush, I think, really, again, put his finger on the idea of service. Right. Service is important. Aggies have served, and they've served well. And this is part of that story. And you can serve in many capacities.
Indeed they have. We're out of time. I wish we could go another hour.
Well, thank you.
Talk about the book, Texas Aggies Go to War. Thank you, Henry Dethloff. From the Spanish-American War to Operation Iraqi Freedom, at Kregerdoor, Patton, Jimmy Doolittle's Tokyo Raid, and James Earl Rudder's Ranger Assault at Pointe du Hoc on D-Day. It's all in the book, Texas Aggies Go to War, by Henry C. Dethloff. You can order your copy online from the University Press, their website, tamu.edu/upress. Thanks to Henry Dethloff, and thanks to all veterans for their service, and thanks to our underwriter, First National Bank. I'm Tom Turbeville. We'll see you next time on Veterans of the Valley.